The first sign came quietly, the way real trouble usually does, small enough to dismiss, familiar enough to ignore. When the Dawsons moved into the old, cedar-sided house in Millbrook, they didn't know its history. They only knew it had been owned for years by a private family who rarely spoke to neighbors, and that the previous owners left in a hurry, refusing to explain why. The house itself wasn't old enough to feel haunted, built in the late 1980s. Modern angles softened by tall pines and slate walkways. But on their very first evening, just before sunset, something happened that would stay with Laura Dawson long after she tried to rationalize it. While unpacking boxes in the living room, she heard a faint, rhythmic tapping upstairs. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. Not loud, not threatening, but precise. Too precise for an old pipe or settling wood. Laura called up to her husband, thinking he was checking the attic crawl space. He called back from the driveway. That detail, his voice coming from outside while the tapping continued above her, would become the first minute of the story she later told with a cold, steady voice, insisting she wasn't someone who believed in that sort of thing. The neighbors, when approached politely, didn't say much at first. But one older woman across the road, Mrs. Ellison, lowered her voice before answering. "You live in the house where she stayed, don't you? Before the accident? Before the skiing trip?" Laura didn't understand at first. She only knew the house had belonged to a family connected to the film industry. But Mrs. Ellison clarified. Some years back, Natasha Richardson had spent a quiet weekend there as a guest of friends. A retreat. A small escape from the city. Mrs. Ellison didn't claim anything dramatic, no ghost stories, no strange legends. Just a memory. She was kind, laughed a lot. She said the place felt peaceful. But as the woman walked away, she added something almost reluctantly. "People say spirits stay in places where they felt calm last, not where they passed." That night, the Dawsons tried to brush off the conversation. They tried even harder to ignore the new sound Laura heard after midnight, something softer, like the faint drag of fabric across the upstairs hallway. The kind of sound made by someone walking slowly, barefoot, careful not to wake anyone. A sound that stopped the moment Laura stepped into the hallway. And in the silence that followed, she felt a strange, unmistakable shift in the air temperature beside her. A spot of cold no wider than a person's shoulder. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She only whispered into the empty hallway, "Is someone here?" Nothing answered. But the cold stayed with her long enough to make her realize the first minute of this story wasn't the beginning of a haunting. It was the beginning of an observation, one that felt patient, searching, almost familiar. As if the presence in the house wasn't trying to frighten them, but trying to remember them, trying to remember itself. Over the next several days, Laura Dawson moved through the house with a kind of cautious attentiveness, the way a person does when they know something is wrong but can't quite name what it is. It wasn't fear. Fear would have been easier, more straightforward. What she felt was an uneasy curiosity, a restless awareness that the house wasn't entirely empty, even when every door was locked and every window sealed against the early autumn chill. The tapping didn't return. Instead, the house shifted to a different language, soft disturbances, tiny interruptions in the ordinary rhythm of daily life. A cabinet left slightly ajar when she was certain she'd closed it. The faint scent of something floral, drifting through the upstairs hallway in the late afternoon, even though she hadn't unpacked a single candle yet. And once, while she was folding laundry, the television in the bedroom flicked on by itself, muted, showing nothing but a static menu screen frozen on an old movie Laura didn't remember ever watching. Her husband, Mark, insisted it was faulty wiring. "This place sat empty for months. Things break," he said, tightening screws on the outlet plates and checking the surge strips like he wanted the explanation to be purely physical, purely practical. But even he paused one evening when they both heard footsteps, the unmistakable sound of someone descending the stairs with unhurried, measured steps. They stood together in the kitchen, hands paused above their plates, each watching the other's expression to see if they, too, had heard it. "I thought you were upstairs," Mark said. "I've been here for half an hour." They checked the house room by room. Nothing disturbed, nothing unusual. And yet, Both came back downstairs feeling as though they had walked through the edges of someone else's presence. The faint residue of movement that didn't belong to either of them. It wasn't until the fourth night that something happened Laura couldn't rationalize. She couldn't sleep, the air felt too still, too dense, so she went downstairs for water. The living room was washed in bluish shapes from the street lamps outside, the furniture casting long shadows across the floor. On the far wall hung a framed photograph left by the previous owners, a group of people standing near the backyard fence, smiling at some summer gathering. Laura had barely noticed it before, but tonight, something about it caught her eye. There were 5 people in the picture. Yet in the wash of dim light, Laura saw something else, something faint, like an outline, standing just behind the group. Not transparent, not defined, but the suggestion of a figure caught between 2 moments of visibility. She blinked, stepped closer, let the cold glass of the frame press against her fingertips. The shape was still there, slight, feminine, head tilted. It wasn't a trick of light. It wasn't a shadow of her own body. The figure stood in a space no shadow should have leaned into. She didn't move for nearly a full minute. Only breathed, only watched. The figure didn't change, didn't sharpen, didn't fade. It simply existed, as if waiting for her to acknowledge it. That was the first moment she truly thought of the conversation with Mrs. Ellison. Of Natasha Richardson staying here once, briefly, quietly, during a weekend meant for rest. Laura lifted the frame from the wall with both hands. The back was undisturbed, the photograph untouched. No other image hidden behind it. No smudge on the glass. Nothing that would explain the woman-shaped imprint hovering in the background like a memory caught on the wrong layer of the film. When she returned the picture to the wall, she felt suddenly watched, not in a menacing way, but the way one feels watched by someone gentle, someone curious. As if the presence had stepped closer. Over the next days, small details sharpened. A coldness that began appearing at the same time each afternoon, late enough that the sun dipped behind the taller trees, early enough that no draft should have formed. A slight pressure in the air in the upstairs guest room, as though someone had recently left the space and the atmosphere hadn't quite settled. The faintest impression on the edge of the bedspread, as though someone had sat there only minutes before. Mark noticed it too, though he tried not to show it. Once, when he walked past the guest room, he stopped, stepped backward, stared at the doorway with narrowed eyes. "Did you put those pillows like that?" he asked. "I haven't touched the guest room." "Why? They look used." Laura stepped beside him, and there it was, the undeniable indentation, the gentle slump in the pillows, the subtle shift of fabric that suggested a head had rested there for a long time. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The house was occupied. Not by something violent. Not by something restless. But by something that remembered being alive. Something that moved softly, carefully, with a kind of emotional weight that felt human. And though neither Laura nor Mark admitted it out loud, they both began to feel the same thing whenever they crossed the upstairs hallway. Whenever they brushed past the stairwell, whenever they stepped into the quiet early morning light of the guest room. Whoever, whatever was here, did not want to leave. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. By the second week, the household began developing an unspoken rhythm around the presence, an awareness that shaped their movements without ever being acknowledged aloud. Laura found herself avoiding the upstairs hallway after dusk, not because she feared it, but because the air always felt heavier then, as if someone invisible was standing just beyond her peripheral vision, leaning slightly, listening. Mark, who once dismissed everything as drafts and faulty wiring, stopped leaving the guest room door closed. Something about closing it felt disrespectful, almost intrusive, like shutting out someone who still believed they had the right to walk those rooms freely. The couple's conversations about the house became strangely careful. They spoke around what they'd experienced, not wanting to trigger more activity. Yet the house didn't react to their silence or caution, it behaved with a kind of quiet autonomy. Lights dimmed gently rather than flicking on and off. The cold spots didn't snap into existence. They drifted into the room like someone entering with soft steps. Even the faint scent flowers, subtle, clean, would appear with an almost emotional timing, often when the day was winding down or when a moment of quiet reflection passed between them. One morning, while Mark left early for work, Laura stood alone in the kitchen making tea. It was one of those still mornings, the kind where the sky looked pale and washed out, and the house seemed suspended in a kind of slow, contemplative hush. As she waited for the kettle to boil, a soft rustling drifted down from the second floor, gentle, rhythmic, like someone smoothing the surface of a made bed or running their palm across folded fabric. Laura set the mug down and went still. The sound continued for a few seconds more, then faded off toward the guest room. Not abruptly, nothing in this haunting ever felt abrupt, but gradually, with the subtle tapering of someone finishing a task and stepping away. She walked upstairs. The guest room door, which she was sure she had left half open, now stood fully open. Daylight filtered in softly, catching dust particles in slow motion. The bed was neatly made, nothing unusual in that, but one detail pulled her closer. Resting on the pillow was a small crease, the faint indentation of a head's weight that hadn't been there the night before. Laura didn't move closer. She didn't touch the bed. Instead, she found herself whispering, "Are you trying to tell me something?" Silence. But a warm, almost tender feeling spread through the room, not physical warmth. Not the heat of the sun, more like the emotional warmth of being near someone who meant no harm. Someone who simply lingered. Later that day, she decided to ask more from the neighbors. She approached Mrs. Ellison again, this time with less caution. They stood near the wooden fence dividing their yards, autumn leaves collecting at their feet. The air smelled of damp soil and distant fireplaces. Laura kept her voice neutral. "You said she stayed here once. Natasha Richardson. Do people talk about that a lot around here?" Mrs. Ellison hesitated. Her eyes softened the way people's eyes do when they speak of someone they admired. "Not a lot, no. It wasn't a public thing. Just a weekend. Her friends, old theater friends, owned the house then. She visited alone. Needed rest, they said." "Did anything happen while she was here?" "Not dramatic," the older woman replied. "But I remember one chilly morning. I saw her outside, walking the path near the pines. She looked peaceful, thoughtful, like she was absorbing the quiet. She waved at me, smiled. One of those smiles you don't forget. Gentle, kind." Her voice softened further. "Sometimes a place holds onto people like that." Laura felt a tightness in her chest, an emotional echo she couldn't explain. She walked home thinking about that morning walk, about a woman finding comfort in the quiet corners of the property. That night, something happened that unsettled her more deeply than anything before, not because it was frightening, but because it felt too real. She woke around 3 a.m. The house was still, the kind of complete stillness that makes every tiny shift in the air feel magnified. As she rolled onto her side, her eyes caught a faint, soft glow coming from the hallway, not a light switch, not moonlight. A diffused, warm illumination, like the reflection from a candle flame just out of sight. She sat up, heart steady but alert. There was no sound, no footsteps, no movement, but the glow lingered, hovering near the guest room door. Laura stood, slowly, deliberately. When she reached the hallway, the glow dimmed, retreating not outward but inward, pulling itself gently into the guest room, shrinking as though absorbed into the air. She stepped inside. The room looked normal, untouched, except for one detail so small she wouldn't have noticed if she hadn't been searching. On the dresser lay a faint smear, as though someone had brushed a fingertip across the dust layer. A single line, soft, curved, almost thoughtful. Mark found her standing there, later that morning, staring at the faint trace. She didn't have to explain. He didn't ask. He only placed a hand on her back and exhaled slowly. They both felt it now clearly, undeniably, that the house held the imprint of a person who had once known peace within its walls. A presence that wasn't trying to scare them or drive them away. A presence that simply refused to fade. In the days that followed, the presence in the house no longer felt like something drifting. It began to feel purposeful, as though it had been waiting for the Dawsons to reach a certain threshold of understanding before showing its hand more clearly. The air of the home felt charged, not frightening, but undeniably full, like a room where someone had been quietly crying or quietly remembering. There was an emotional texture to every hour, something soft and steady, like a heartbeat beneath the floorboards. The shift became unmistakable on a cold Thursday night. Laura had been sitting on the bottom step of the staircase, sorting mail, when she heard the faint sound of a woman humming. Not a melody she recognized, gentle, wavering, as if carried from a memory rather than a full, present voice. It drifted from the upstairs hallway, floated down toward her, and lingered in the curve of the stairwell with surprising clarity. She didn't move for a long moment. She simply listened. There was warmth in that humming, an echo of calm, an echo of someone who once found comfort in this place. And as the notes thinned into silence, Laura whispered a barely audible question into the empty air. "What do you want?" The house didn't answer outright, but the question itself opened something. That night, as she lay in bed, the dream came. Not a nightmare, not a hallucination. A dream so clear it felt like being pulled into someone else's recollection. She stood in the backyard, sunlight spilling across the lawn, the tall pines watching silently. A woman stood near the fence, blonde hair tied loosely, posture relaxed, wearing a soft, cream-colored sweater. She wasn't facing Laura, only gazing out toward the trees with a calmness that felt almost protective. The woman turned slightly, not fully, just enough for Laura to see a profile, gentle and unmistakably familiar from photographs she'd seen over the years. Natasha Richardson. She didn't speak. She didn't gesture. She simply looked with a kind of peace, as if she was acknowledging Laura's presence the way someone acknowledges a passing memory, a soft echo of time. When Laura woke, she found her pillow damp with tears she didn't remember shedding. She didn't tell Mark, not at first. He wouldn't dismiss it, but the intimacy of the dream felt like something she needed to process privately. But what she could no longer deny was that the presence was not trapped, not angry, not lost. It was lingering with purpose. Over the next few days, the activity intensified, not in chaos, but in clarity. The floral scent became more consistent, appearing whenever Laura entered the guest room. The bed always looked freshly settled, as if someone had just left it. And once, while dusting the dresser, she placed her hand over the same faint curve of that fingerprint-like smear and felt a soft, tingling coolness beneath her skin, like touching the trace of a memory. On the final night, the clarity broke open. A storm rolled in, late wind heavy, sky low, rain drumming against the windows in a steady, restless rhythm. The power flickered once, twice. Mark went to check the circuit breaker in the garage while Laura lit a small battery lantern in the living room. The house felt different tonight, tense, but in a way that resembled sorrow more than threat. The air felt thick, charged with an emotional density she couldn't identify. As thunder rolled, Laura saw movement at the corner of her eye, not a figure this time, but a soft shimmer, a drift of warmth across the hallway. The guest room door swung open gently, not pushed by wind, not rattled loose, opened deliberately. Laura rose to her feet, the lantern trembling slightly in her hand. She walked toward the room slowly, each step measured. As she entered, the floral scent washed over her fully, stronger than ever, as though the presence had gathered the last of its strength. The bedspread shifted, a dip visible, undeniable, pressed into the edge of the mattress, as if someone had just sat down. Laura's breath caught, and for the first time, she felt a presence not beside her, not behind her, but directly in front of her, soft, warm, gentle, almost like standing face to face with a person who simply wanted to be acknowledged. She closed her eyes. "You're safe," she whispered. "It's okay." The room exhaled. The cold lifted. The air softened. The indentation in the bed slowly smoothed itself out, as if someone had risen with grace, not urgency. And for the first time, the house felt empty, not abandoned, but eased, like a grief finally spoken aloud. The floral scent drifted away. The pressure in the room dissolved. The atmosphere, once heavy with an emotional echo, became plain, ordinary, human. Mark returned from the garage moments later. Something happened. I felt, I don't know, something lift. Laura nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "She left, Mark." He didn't question it. He only took her hand and looked around the room, feeling the new stillness. From that night onward, the house remained quiet. No tapping, no footsteps, no scents or cold spots or faint movements. The guest room stayed untouched. The lights stayed steady. The atmosphere felt whole, balanced, like a place where something had finally completed what it needed to complete. It wasn't a haunting. Not truly. It was a visitation, a final, gentle return to a place where she had once felt peace. And when she left completely. But the Dawsons would always remember that their home had once held a presence so profoundly human that it never felt like a ghost at all. Felt like a goodbye.